Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants Hangout. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I'll be your host for today. Those who have been tuning in this month know that we've been celebrating the adventure of a new year. So we've been talking to adventurers and explorers from all over the world, learning about some of their expeditions, but also learning about some of the planning, learning about the resiliency, the goal setting, the risk taking, the things that are needed to challenge yourself and push yourself to try new things. So I'm really excited today to be joined by Roz Savage. Roz is the first woman to row solo across the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans. She holds multiple world records and has rowed over 15,000 miles, taken around 5 million oar strokes, and spent over 500 days of her life at sea in a 23-foot rowboat. She now uses her ocean rowing adventures to inspire action on the top environmental challenges facing the world today. She's a United Nations climate hero, a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society, as well as the Explorers Club, and was named Adventurer of the Year by National Geographic. So Roz, it's always great when we can steal a little bit of your time. And I believe we've done maybe 2 or 3 of these in the past. So it's always great to have you joining us.
I've been looking forward to it, Joe. Thanks for inviting me back.
All right, that's great. Well, Roz, we're going to talk a little bit about some of your past adventures, about what it took both before, during, and maybe even after. And of course, the work that you're doing now before we meet some of our classrooms. But I think maybe the easiest spot to start off is what inspired you to start rowing in the ocean in the first place?
Yeah, it was quite a surprising career move, especially when you bear in mind I don't particularly like physical exercise. So what on earth would make a couch potato like me want to row alone across 3 oceans? I'd been working for a while as management consultant. I'd actually been working for about 11 years. And I somehow had the sense that there was something more adventurous, something more exciting in life than working in an office. And so I was really inspired to make this big shift I had an environmental awakening back in 2003. I suddenly became aware of not just climate change, but many of the other challenges facing our environment right now, like deforestation and ocean acidification and loss of coral reefs. And when I found out about this, I was sort of embarrassed that I hadn't been aware of it before. I think awareness has come a long way in the last 15, 16 years. But I was so impassioned by this. I was just on fire. I desperately wanted to do something to raise awareness and hopefully inspire some action on these environmental issues. But I really had no idea what. I had opted out of management consulting by then, and it just wasn't clear to me what I could do to get people's attention for my message. And then by chance, I made friends with this guy through the Royal Geographical Society, actually, who had rowed across the Atlantic with, of all people, his mother. And I think up until that point, I believed that to have a big adventure, you had to be some big dude with a bushy beard. So to find out that somebody's mother could row across an ocean, I thought, well, I know how to row. How hard can it be to row across an ocean? As it turned out, it's pretty hard. But luckily, I wasn't aware quite how hard it was going to be at that time. And it just seemed the perfect way to use my adventures to get people's attention, talk about our environmental issues through my blogs and talks and books and podcasts and hangouts. And so that's what I committed to doing, little knowing just what I was letting myself in for.
So, rowing across one ocean is pretty amazing. What made it have to be 3?
Originally I'd wanted to row around the world. And then when I found out a bit more about ocean currents and winds and how they work, I found out that because a rowboat is very slow, and unlike a sailboat, there's no way that you can actually go upwind in a rowboat. So it just wasn't going to be possible to do a full circumnavigation of the world by rowboat. So I felt that I really wanted to do something epic, something really out of the ordinary. And I knew I was quite, even though, as I say, I don't like exercise, and you know, I don't look particularly athletic. I'm only 5'4". Probably some of the kids in the classrooms are taller than I am already. But I'm quite good at endurance. Once I really commit to doing something, then I don't like to quit. So I had the sense that this was something that I was going to be able to do.
All right. And so I know myself and other people and, kids in the classroom often have big ideas and want to try new things or maybe take a risk, but they're able to talk themselves out of it. How are you able to kind of push those feelings aside, push those doubts, those fears aside, and not talk yourself out of trying something like that?
It's such a great question. And I know when I first had this crazy idea, it really just hit me like a bolt from the blue. I was just driving in my car. Still, yeah, I've been sitting with this question for several months of what can I do to raise environmental awareness. So this idea hit me, and my first thought was, that is brilliant. Like, that is absolutely perfect. That ticks all the boxes. And then my second thought was, this is without a doubt the worst idea that I've ever had in my life. And I think the way I look back on that now, this sort of battle that was going on, I feel like in my heart, I knew this was my call to adventure. This was my big opportunity. This was going to be like the great achievement of my life. But I also think it's the brain's job to try and keep us safe. And the brain doesn't really like change. So the brain will jump in and it'll go, here's 1,000 reasons why this can't work. Like, you'll fail, you'll be embarrassed, it's too difficult, you don't have what it takes. This is the sort of message that inner critic in our brain. And I think now I'm much better at following my heart. I mean, of course, the ideal is what happened after about a week of my head and heart arguing with each other, was that my heart persuaded the head that actually this was why this was a good idea, and this is what we're going to do. So I think that it's useful to have that negative voice saying you really need to pay attention to these risks and these dangers, because that's what's going to keep us safe. But it's also, when we really know in our heart of hearts that this is what we've been called to do, it's really important to listen to that as well.
All right. I think that's an awesome point. I've been diving for over 10 years now, and still, before any new dive, there's always a little bit of butterflies. But I think that's really important because it keeps you sharp.
Yeah.
You're thinking about the risks. I think it's that day where I'm about to go diving and I don't feel that I should be nervous. So I imagine it was
absolutely. Yeah. And even as my voyages went on, I would still get nervous before each one. And as you say, that's good because it makes you pay attention. Obviously, doing these massive expeditions for months at a time out at sea with no support boat, I was going to be completely on my own. I had to make sure that I had everything that I needed, not just the food and the water maker, but also the toolkit with every last nut, bolt and screw that I might possibly need while I was out there, and all the tools and the first aid kit. I had to be like unbelievably well prepared. So I definitely needed to be paying attention to all of that.
All right. So you've had this idea, you've pushed the doubts aside. Can you give us a little taste of the logistics that it takes to prepare for rowing across an ocean?
It was pretty huge, actually. Yeah, when I decided to do the first ocean, the Atlantic, I was starting from absolute zero. So, you know, I said that my heart and my head were arguing for about a week about this. When I got to the end of the week, the brain went, okay, well, if we were going to do this ridiculous thing, then what would we need to do? What books would we need to read? What people would we need to talk to? What would we need to buy? Obviously a boat and all the equipment to go on it. So how much money are we going to need? And I just made this massive list in an Excel spreadsheet of all of the things that I needed to do. And I'd broken it down to such a level of detail that although it was a very long list, when I looked at it, I thought, yeah, I can actually do all of these things. Like, they were small enough that they seemed they seemed challenging but doable. And so I really just worked my way down the list. I had to take various training courses. I'd only been to sea once before, unless you count the ferries across the English Channel from England to France. So I needed to learn about sea survival and how to do first aid at sea. I had to learn about how to navigate by the stars and ocean weather and how to plan a voyage. I needed to learn how to use VHF radios, which is what you use for maritime communications. There was loads that I needed to learn. I also trained like crazy. I was doing lots of aerobic training, including sessions on the rowing machine of up to 16 hours in a day, which is really, really good for training your boredom threshold. What else did I have to do? Obviously buy the boat, get that all fitted out with solar panels, electrical system, a satellite phone, GPS so I could navigate. It was a really huge project, and I only had 14 months to get ready, which might sound like a long time, but actually there was so much to do. But I think that was quite good because it kept me so busy that I didn't really have too much time to stop and wonder if this was a good idea or not.
All right. Well, I don't want to talk about the rowing too much more because I know the students are going to have lots of questions about it. But maybe before we move from the subject, can you give a quick example of a really good day on the ocean and a really bad day on the ocean?
Yeah, there are a lot more bad days than good days, actually. But it was always a good day when I saw some wildlife, like dolphins and whales. And I get very excited about seeing sharks as well. I wasn't really scared of sharks, provided that I stayed in the boat and they stayed in the water. But I think my favourite creatures are turtles, which I only saw a couple of times when I was out at sea. But it was so cool. I'd seen them before when I was scuba diving, but I didn't know that they actually ventured right out into the middle of an ocean where the water is 2 miles deep or more. So yeah, seeing the turtles, that was really, really cool. And the worst day. I think so many to choose from, but I think really the worst was when my first attempt on the Pacific ended in failure. My boat had been capsizing, and it's designed to turn the right way up when it capsizes, but it was really capsizing more than it should have been. And I would probably have carried on, except that I'd mentioned on my blog what was going on, and somebody who was very concerned for my safety decided, without checking with me first, that he was going to send out the US Coast Guard to come and pick me up. So, long story short, I ended up in the back of a Coast Guard helicopter, having to abandon my boat at sea. So that was pretty humiliating and obviously tremendously disappointing. And some people on the internet were not very nice about it and made all kinds of personal remarks about my intelligence and all sorts of other things that didn't really seem very related to the topic at all. But I learned that when people make unpleasant comments like that, it actually says more about them than about me. And my best response to them was to come back to shore, get my boat back, fix up the boat, and set out again the next year and succeed. So that's what I did.
And that's what I love about you, Roz. A lot of people, you know, something like that happens, that might be it. That might be too much. But, you know, I've always thought that there's beauty in a failure, even if you don't see it at the time. And
oh yeah,
you know, for the classrooms joining us, things might seem tough. Things, you know, might do poorly on a test or something might, you know, not go so perfectly in your personal life. But these are, you know, lessons to learn from and come back even stronger the next time. So that's what I love about you, Roz, is that didn't stop you. You just went right back out and did what you had to do.
Well, it's really true. Looking back, I would say that so just to briefly go back to the Atlantic crossing, when so many things went wrong. All 4 of my oars broke. My stove broke, so I had to eat all my food cold. My satellite phone broke, so I lost all communications. My stereo broke, so I had no entertainment at all, apart from my own thoughts. And at the time, it was so hard. Just every day, it seemed like something was going wrong, and I was injured as well. And it took me a long, long time to get more philosophical about this, and actually to be really grateful that all of those things went wrong. Because, of course, I'd hoped that everything would go smoothly and easily, and it absolutely didn't. But if it had gone smoothly, I wouldn't have learned anywhere near as much as I did about myself and about how resilient I can be when the going gets tough. So yeah, it took me about 10 years to be grateful. But looking back now, I'm grateful for every single thing that went wrong, because I learned so much.
Awesome. Well, Roz, before we meet our classrooms, one more quick question about now. What are you doing now? How are you using your adventures to inspire people and also kind of still keep bringing that awareness to what we're doing to our planet?
Yeah, I still do a lot of work on environmental stuff, especially around plastic pollution in the oceans. But I'm also particularly focusing on women and girls now, because looking around, it's still, at our politicians and our corporate leaders, it's still very much a man's world. And I'm absolutely convinced that in the future, if we're going to have a more sustainable and peaceful world, I think the voices of women and girls are absolutely vital to that conversation. Not just nice to have, they're absolutely vital. And I think as women, we tend to have a stronger inner critic. And so it's often hard for us to find the courage to speak up. But I've managed to go from being a very shy introvert to finding my courage to speak up, because I care so much about these issues. So if I can do it, I really think that we all can. So I'm creating a global women's and girls network called The Sisters, so that we can all support each other as we speak up for a better future.
All right, that's great, Roz. And I agree with you 100%. That's next month we kick all the men out, and all February long we host exclusively female scientists and explorers from all over the world, so they can share their stories and what they're doing and just how they're being awesome everywhere. So February is always a great month.
There are some fantastic women doing fantastic work, and I think we don't get to hear enough about them. So thank you so much, Joe, for showcasing them.
All right. Well, I think it's time to meet some of our classrooms. Just a quick reminder to any classrooms who are tuning in live on YouTube right now. There's a chat sidebar on the right. If you let us know where you're watching from, we'll work in a couple questions if we have time, which I'm sure we will. But let's meet our first classroom. Let's see. Let's go to Oakville, Ontario, here in Canada. Mrs. Gilkinson's grade 4s are hanging out with us. Let's get their microphone on. How are we doing, grade 4s?
Good.
Hi.
Who's got a question?
Me. Go ahead. Gabriel, go ahead.
When your boat was capsizing, did you have like a flare gun?
Did you have a flare gun when your boat was capsizing?
A flare? I did have a flare gun, actually, but I never used it. It wouldn't really help so much when the boat is capsizing. It's if I'm about to be run over by a container ship or an oil tanker. The idea is that I would shoot a flare to bring their attention to the fact that I was there. But I never actually needed to use it, fortunately.
All right. And then while you were out there, did you ever have any close calls? I know a few rowers who have had some close calls with tankers.
Yeah, I did. It was especially nerve-wracking the last little bit of the Pacific Ocean, arriving into Papua New Guinea, where there's a very, very busy shipping channel. And most other parts of the ocean, I might not see another vessel for months on end. But that channel coming into Papua New Guinea, I could sometimes see 5 ships at a time. And especially at night times, that was very nerve-wracking. I did have lights on my boat, but as you can imagine, it's a very small boat with very small lights, so I didn't feel at all safe. Didn't sleep too well during that stage.
I can imagine. Okay, let's go to Mrs. Elliott's class, grade 5, 6s joining us in Ontario as well. Let's get their microphone on. How are we doing, 5, 6s? And then tell me, I just have Ontario. Where in Ontario are you guys?
Vermilion Bay.
Vermilion Bay.
All right, very cool. Who's got a question?
Haley.
How do you ever navigate by the stars anymore?
Oh, what a lovely question. I know how to navigate by the stars, but it's actually really complicated. You have to have a book full of tables, and you have a sort of machine called a sextant to measure the angle between the horizon and the sun or the moon or a star. And it's very easy to get it wrong because you have to go through about 13 different steps. So let me just say, I love GPS. It's so much easier and quicker. But it was quite cool learning how to navigate by the stars, just because you really get a sense of where the Earth is in our solar system and how everything sort of fits together and moves around. Thanks, that was a lovely question.
All right. We're going to go to Mr. Richards' class. They're in Amherst View, Ontario, grade 5, 6s. And Mr. Richards, your microphone's just off my screen today with a full house. So if you don't mind unmuting for me, say hi, everybody, and then let's grab a question.
All right. Say, are we on mute?
Hi.
All right.
Gotcha.
All right, go, Gavin.
Okay. My question is, what was the hardest ocean to navigate through?
Ooh, they were all quite challenging in different ways. I would say the Pacific, on balance, was maybe the hardest from the navigation perspective, because I needed to break the journey into 3 stages so that I could resupply with food. And some of the islands that I had to land on were very, very small in a very big ocean. So I had to be very careful with my steering and really make sure that day after day after day, I was doing the right course corrections to make sure that I didn't just go zipping straight past one of these islands, missing it completely.
All right. Good question. Let's see. Let's go to Mrs. Russett's class. So they're in Arnprior, Ontario, grade 5. So let's get their microphone on. There we go. How we doing, grade 5s?
Yeah.
Got a nice big group of grade 5s.
2 classes.
Perfect.
What was the most dangerous animal you encountered?
The most dangerous animal. Well, you know, I actually really don't like jellyfish. I don't think that any of the jellyfish that I saw were terribly poisonous, but they just absolutely give me the heebie-jeebies. So when I was rowing through jellyfish, I certainly wasn't going to jump over the side of the boat for a swim. And, you know, some jellyfish are extremely dangerous. The Portuguese man-of-war can actually kill a person. So I wasn't going to take any chances. I did see sharks as well, but they didn't come particularly close. But I did sometimes see them having a feeding frenzy where they would have rounded up a school of fish. And I would see that the surface of the ocean was all kind of seething like this. And I'd see a few shark fins going backwards and forwards. And there'd be a flock of birds as well that would swoop in to get the leftovers that the sharks had left behind. So yeah, that also was not a good time to go swimming.
But kind of on that subject, you would have to get in sometimes to clean the bottom of the boat.
I did, and I really hated doing this job because most of the time the ocean is quite rough, but there would be these barnacles that would grow on the bottom of the boat. And if I didn't get over the side once in a while with my scraper to scrape them off, then they would get bigger and bigger. They can grow, well, at least to like a couple of inches in size. And you can imagine how much extra drag that is on the bottom of the boat. It would really slow me down. So yeah, I had to put on my my snorkel and my mask and hop over the side and scrape the bottom of the boat. But that was absolutely my least favourite job.
All right. Let's see. Let's go to our class in Virginia. So we've got, with Mrs. Prickett, we've got some grade 9 students in Staunton. Let me get your microphone on. There it is. How's it going, boys and girls?
It's good.
Hi, Virginia. I can't see you, but I hope you can see me.
Yeah, sorry, our camera's not working. We've got about 38 students here in 9th grade, and we got some questions. So, Joe. I don't know if she can hear me.
How did you train?
Try and go nice and loud. I missed that.
How did you train for the trip?
How did you train?
Oh, thank you. Yes, I couldn't quite hear that. I did a lot of, well, for the Atlantic, I trained really, really hard. I did lots of running and rowing and training with weights. And the main reason for doing so much training was that I didn't want to get a sports injury, like a repetitive strain injury, once I got in the boat. But that theory didn't work. Within the first 2 weeks, I got tendinitis in my shoulders, which was really painful and caused me a lot of problems on the way across. I had to take a lot of painkillers, which is not a great idea, but I didn't have much choice. So after that, for the later voyages, I decided there were better ways to spend my time than spending 16 hours in a day on the rowing machine. So I did what in ocean rowing circles we call weights training, meaning you wait until you get in the boat and then you start training. So I would pretty much just set out from port and then get fit as I went along. And that seemed to work much better.
All right, the things you learn from rowing across a couple oceans. All right, let's go to Mrs. Wood's class, grade 7s in Bradford, Ontario. Let's get their microphone turned on. There we go. How are we doing, Bradford?
Hello.
All right, who's up?
Do you plan on rowing the Arctic Ocean?
Oh, that is a great question. I've actually thought about, it's interesting that when I first started rowing across oceans, it was 14 years ago, and it would have been absolutely impossible to row the Arctic Ocean. And now, unfortunately, it's a lot more possible. And they think that fairly soon the Arctic could be completely ice-free in the summer. I don't think I'll do it. I think I'm getting a bit too old now to do such things, but I do know a couple of rowing crews that have tried to do the Northwest Passage across the north of Canada. They haven't been able to fully do it yet, but I'm sure that in the near future, sadly, thanks to climate change, it is going to be possible. But yeah, I don't think I'm going to be there. Looks a bit cold and a bit hostile to me.
Yes, and then the Southern Ocean, the Roaring 40s, I think that would just be 100% a no-go. That would be pretty crazy.
There is somebody planning to do it. There are some crazy, brave people out there. Yeah, there is someone planning to do the Southern Ocean around Antarctica. But yeah, the waves down there can get really huge. So yeah, not my cup of tea.
All right, we've got.
I'd be interested to see if it's possible.
Yeah. So we've got Mrs. Robertson's class, grade 8s in Mississauga, Ontario. You'll have to turn on the mic for me and say hi, and then we'd love a question.
So how did you deal with the extreme weather?
How did I deal with the extreme weather? If it really got too extreme, then because believe it or not, I do have quite a strong sense of self-preservation. If it got really bouncy and the waves were really big, I would go into the cabin and tie myself down onto the bunk and just ride out the storm, wait for things to calm down a bit. Because I didn't really want to be out on the deck when the boat capsized. So that's the cabin is always the safest place to be. But it could get pretty boring being stuck in there for 2 or 3 days. But that was definitely the safest option. And I could also, obviously I couldn't anchor to the bottom of the ocean because it's about 2 miles deep, which would require a much longer anchor chain than I could possibly have. But I could put out a sea anchor, which is like a big parachute about 12 feet across that's attached to the bow of the boat with a rope. So if I put out the sea anchor, it would help stabilize the boat. It would turn the boat so that the bow was facing into the waves, so the waves would roll down the sides of the boat rather than hitting it sideways on and capsizing it. So that was my strategy: hunker down and wait for it to pass.
Okay, so I think we visited all of our live classrooms. I want to give a quick shout out. I know there's a couple of groups on YouTube. So I think Mr. White's group is watching us in St. Catharines, and I think Mrs. Herrera's group in Warsaw, Indiana is joining us as well. So, oh, and Charlotte, North Carolina as well. So if you have any questions, make sure you get those in, and I'll work a couple in. But let's just open things up now. So in the classrooms, if you guys have another question, I have a feeling every classroom is going to wave. But if you have a question, put your hand up or send someone right up front, and that'll be my signal to visit your classroom again. And in fact, let's start off in Mrs. Gilkinson's class. I see someone.
Oh, wow, we've got loads of hands. Look at that.
Yeah. We'll get as many as we can in the next few minutes.
What was the hardest challenge they had?
Nice and loud, honey.
What's the hardest challenge?
Yeah.
Oh, I think the hardest challenge was my own thoughts, especially on the Atlantic, my first ocean. I would often get really doubtful about whether I had enough strength and enough resilience and enough determination to finish. And I could give myself a really hard time just inside my own head. So I had to learn some techniques for trying to keep those negative voices at bay. So if my inner critic was telling me that I wasn't up to the task and I should just quit before something bad happened, I would just tell the inner critic, yes, thank you very much for your opinion, but I've committed to doing this, so I'm just going to keep on keeping on until I get to the other side of this ocean. So yeah, my worst enemy was myself, but I found ways to deal with it.
All right. Let's see. Someone else, nice front and center, if you have another question. Well, I can't not stop here. Mr. Richards, if you want to turn your microphone on, I see someone nice front and center, and then we're going to jump to Mrs. Elliott's class.
Okay, Nikki.
What are the varieties of different animals you've found so far through your journey?
Sorry, say again. What was the different animals?
I think he's wondering about some of the different animals, the different marine life you encountered.
Yeah, I think the coolest thing that I saw was a whale shark. You might want to Google those. They're actually filter feeders, so they're not scary Jaws type sharks. They weren't going to eat me, and they're really beautiful. They've got lovely markings on their skin, although their faces are a bit weird because they've got like really, really big mouths like this, like a cave. And the baby, the whale shark that came to visit me, luckily was just a baby. It was only about 8 feet long, because they can grow to be about 60 or 70 feet, which is huge. That would have been about 3 times the size of my boat. So I'm not sure I would have wanted to meet its mother. But this baby whale shark spent about 20 minutes just swimming around my boat. So it was like it was checking me out and I was checking it out. That was definitely my most exciting wildlife encounter.
Oh, that's amazing. And then which of the 3 oceans maybe stood out? Was there one thing I hear too is that rowers who have been out a few times have noticed that the amount of life they see is a little bit less as time passes. Did you notice that at all?
I wouldn't say I noticed that. I definitely saw the most wildlife on the Pacific, but I think that was largely because it was mostly, not always, but mostly it was much calmer. than the other two oceans. And you can imagine that if I'm really low in the water in my rowboat, so if I'm in 20-foot waves, I really can't see very far. So there could be loads of wildlife, but I can't see it because my view is being blocked by all these big waves. Whereas on the Pacific, on the days when it was nice and flat, I could really see anything that showed up. So for me, I would say the Pacific, especially the middle stage of the Pacific, between Hawaii and the Republic of Kiribati, and you might have to look up on a map to find out where Kiribati is, that was definitely where I saw the most wildlife. And it was also where the ocean was flattest as I went through the doldrums, which is where the wind really drops away to nothing. So it's very calm and very, very, very hot.
All right, Miss Ellie, the last year, you're gone.
Where did you end when you rode across the Pacific Ocean?
Where did you start and end?
Oh, where did you start and end?
Where did I started from San Francisco. I rode out under the Golden Gate Bridge, and I had to leave at midnight because the tides are very, very strong under the Golden Gate Bridge because you've got a very big bay emptying out through a very narrow gap. So to fit in with the tides, I had to leave at midnight, which is not my favourite time of day to start an 8,000-mile voyage. So rode out from there, and then I stopped in Hawaii because it would have been a shame not to. And then I stopped again in Kiribati, and I finished in Papua New Guinea. So it was my knowledge of the geography of the Pacific Ocean really improved a heck of a lot on that crossing. I hadn't even heard of Kiribati until I needed somewhere to land, which incidentally is the only country in the world that's on the equator and on the international date line. Bet you didn't know that.
All right, and it's massively spread out over the ocean too, which is pretty cool.
It is, yeah. It's much more water than land.
I want to give a quick shout out to Mrs. Mahoney's group at Park Road Montessori in Charlotte. They're tuning in. I think we'll visit Mrs. Prickett's class in just a second because it looks like they have their camera working so we can see them this time. Right. And then, but I'm going to take one quick question from YouTube about, this is our class from Indiana, wondering about how you ration your supplies for that long.
Well, actually, it's surprising just how much food you can fit onto a 23-foot rowboat. I took lots and lots of Lara bars with me. If any of you know those fruit and nut bars, I've eaten thousands of those, and they pack a lot of calories into a small space, so those were great. I would also take lots of freeze-dried meals with me, like the ones that you might take if you go camping, where you just add boiling water to them to rehydrate them. Ate lots of nuts and dried fruit and oatmeal and peanut butter, all these really high calorie foods. So it was quite easy to fit a lot of food on. So even when I did the Indian Ocean, which was my longest non-stop voyage, that was 5 months alone at sea, I did have a pretty big mountain of food that I packed into my boat, but I still had some left over at the end. So it was actually great. I was eating 4,000 or 5,000 calories a day and still losing weight because I was burning off so much energy doing all that rowing.
All right, and Mrs. Prickett's class, you can have the final question before we wrap for today.
So I was wondering how much fresh water is in the middle of the ocean.
Oh, well, the only fresh water for miles around was on my boat. I had a water maker that was powered by my solar panels, and that was how I produced most of my water. It also broke quite often because electrical equipment doesn't like seawater all that much. It kept rusting. So I did have about, I had enough spare water on board to keep me going for about a month if the water maker broke. So there was only one time that I had to get a resupply, and I was lucky enough to meet up with some scientists who were also raising awareness of plastic pollution in the Pacific. So I was able to meet up with them, and they gave me a resupply. So it actually worked out really well, because otherwise, yeah, when that watermaker broke that time, I tried catching rainwater, and it's actually really difficult. Even when you think it's raining really, really hard, it's quite difficult to catch it in a bucket. So I was very grateful for having my watermaker. So otherwise I'd be very thirsty.
All right. Well, boys and girls, classrooms, thank you so much for hanging out with us today. As per
Yeah, thanks for the great questions.
Absolutely. Your questions were great as always. And Roz, so good to steal some of your time. So good to hear that you're keeping busy and doing some really awesome projects to raise awareness to not only climate change, but also giving a voice to present and future female scientists, explorers, adventurers, whomever they may be. So Roz, thank you so much for hanging out with us today. And I can't wait till we can do another one of these down the road.
My absolute pleasure. Anytime. Thanks so much. Bye.
All right, let's turn on the microphones, boys and girls, nice and loud. Awesome job as always. Thanks so much, everyone. We're signing off for today.